Hello and welcome to another LinkedIn Live session hosted by SALT.agency. Now, today, before we get into the session itself, can we just come over some little ground rules? Please add comments, feel free on LinkedIn, let us know what your thoughts are and ask questions. But also, please remember these comments are a safe space, and anyone being abusive or disrespectful to people's opinions, we will report and delete as per we can through LinkedIn. Now, if you want to stay up to date with SALT Agency and further LinkedIn Live sessions, please do give us a follow on the company page on LinkedIn. So please feel free to follow myself and the other participants on this webinar as well. And also please subscribe to the SALT YouTube channel where we'll be publishing these recordings about a week or two after they've gone live on LinkedIn with a playback. Now, without further ado, today we're going to be looking at the ethical application of AI in content marketing. Well, thankfully, it won't be me doing this, so you're saved from my voice. Today, we're going to have a gracious pleasure of the company of Andy Jessup, our head of content marketing, and also Natalia Stecco, who is one of our content consultants. So without further ado, I'm going to leave the stage to both of those, and I wish you all a happy webinar.
That's a very good introduction, Dan. Thank you very much. How are you doing, Natalia?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good.
So for everyone watching, thank you for joining us. The way that we've kind of constructed the way this is going to work is we've been kind of planning this for about a month. We've had it advertised on LinkedIn and other social media platforms, and we've had a lot of questions and a lot of people are interested in like certain topics. So what we've done is we've picked some of the kind of most interesting questions and some of the kind of most common ones that people have been coming up with. So I'll go into the first question, which is, in what ways can we mitigate the risks associated with AI's potential to create convincing yet false or misleading content, and what measures can be adapted to ensure the authenticity of AI-generated content? Now, that's quite a long one, and it's quite good. I think, first of all, primary issue is that, as we all know, AI is advancing at such a quick rate. There's actually kind of an S-curve that works with all technology. I think it's called the Sigma curve. So what we have is when we have new technologies, there's always like an existential growth that goes like that, and it tends to plateau. And that when it plateaus, we gain a better understanding of its capabilities, where we've got to, and kind of the ground rules that we can build into it. We had that with mobile phones, I think, in the mid 2000s, where we all of a sudden we were able to do video calls, we were able to take brilliant photography and even edit our photos and send them out. We weren't able to do that, say, 2008, 2009, or at least not very well. But what we have is that when we're creating rules and when we're creating, say, guidelines for AI, we have the technology first, so the technology has to come first. And the primary issue that we have with AI is there's no real regulations. In other forms of marketing, there is regulations. But at the minute, so for example, for that exact, what we have there is search engines. You know, we created search engines, and then we needed to create the right to be forgotten and the right to privacy. So we will get those kind of regulations that come in later, which we do have in marketing, like say gambling is heavily regulated, but we have to kind of bring those in as we're developing them. The EU is actually proposing new legal frameworks around how AI is used. It has, I think, four kind of tiers that it's currently breaking into. The first one is an unacceptable tier, which is a threat to people. Then there's a high risk tier, which is a threat to infrastructure. A limited risk tier, which is a threat to decision making. So that's where chatbots come in. So when people are wanting to make informed decisions from brands, which is generated by AI, the EU is looking into legal frameworks about that and how that can be regulated. And then there's minimal risk, which involves the free use of applications like video games or spam filters. And I think you had a very good point on the last one there, and I think that's where a lot of this kind of comes in for at least content marketing.
Yeah, I think the whole thing with sort of misleading content is a really big concern when it comes to AI, and it's something that's very scary to marketers, but also consumers as well. I think an example of this is like social media. So a lot of the time people will believe what they see without kind of questioning it. And AI is going to kind of add to that risk. So, for example, live streamers in China specifically at the moment are streaming for 24, 48 hours or more on TikTok selling and promoting products. But then they're actually AI generated clones of the real streamers. So the way they're doing this is giving a 1 minute video to a company who are then giving them back sort of AI generated clones that they can use as they will, like deepfake clones. And I think, as we know, deepfakes are a serious concern. There's been controversy in sort of the news unit with Taylor Swift having fallen victim to explicit deepfakes, and it is really misleading the audience. There's Mr. Beast, he was being used and didn't even realise it. There's political issues now that are coming into it, which I think are making government about it a little bit more, especially with sort of approaching elections. And then we've got sort of evolving technologies like OpenAI introducing Sora, which is creating video from one line of text, and it's creating these videos before our eyes essentially, and we've got to have an ethical responsibility with that. We have to have a responsibility as marketers and people using AI to not fully, to understand the risk and understand how consumers might perceive this. I think some companies, big leading technology companies, are already starting to label AI content. So Meta, for example, they've recently started labeling AI generated images on Facebook and Instagram and Threads. So soon people are going to be able to distinguish properly between what's AI generated and created by humans and what's not. This initiative is kind of building from Meta. It's on an existing practice they've got, which is labeling photorealistic images. So you'll see a little notification that kind of says imagine with AI, and it's aiming to provide clear transparency. But Meta are kind of taking that responsibility a step further, because they're now trying to be able to identify anything that comes up on their social media, whether it's AI generated, which I think is really important, because when you see a photo or video, you have a right to know whether it's been created by a computer or captured by a person, because it can completely change how you perceive this. So I think disclosure is not just good practice anymore. It's like essential for maintaining trust with an audience.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of social media sites at the minute are doing it exactly as you say. It's gone political. So there's a lot, like, I think they're doing it basically as well because there's the 2024 election coming up. And when you have this technology that can, clone people's faces, clone people's voices, they're literally worried about kind of the Trump-Biden kind of 2024 election, where people can just say anything using the voice and faces of like candidates that can just flood the world with misinformation until it becomes meaningless. So the fact that these are coming in now is really important. And I think I was watching a webinar recently, and they were saying this is kind of the last kind of big election in the US where it's not going to be heavily kind of either disrupted by or run by AI. Just because the amount of like people and even like say bad actors or other governments that can use it to manipulate how things are happening. There was a level of there's a huge level of manipulation, obviously, in the last US election. But the fact that it's moved on so quickly is incredible. But it's interesting as well, 'cause brands also need to think about things like this. So when they are, say, associating themselves with Mr. Beast, who may promote their stuff, yet he is actually being imitated by other people who can basically say what they want at this point. It can become very damaging for a brand, and they need to put guidelines. They need to create their own guidelines, which is what we're going to talk about later. So it's all food for thought. It's all very interesting. Exactly. So another question we had is, what ethical guidelines are essential for using AI in content marketing? How can organizations ensure responsible use of AI? What are considered best practices for the ethical development and deployment of AI within the content marketing sphere? And I think that's a very good question. It's kind of what I just said then. Companies need to instill their own standards and practices. And I think what we saw this week is that there was is a Gemini that had a real issue with the content it was creating, where it was unfortunately there's a lot of racist and misogynistic images that were being created, and Google have had to come back and change how that works, change how the algorithm works. And that's kind of the issue that a lot of companies will face, is they'll put out this brilliant technology, but the rules and guidelines that they put out must constantly evolve with the technology as it evolves. And I think a good example actually of a company that's done that well is IBM. They have 5 pillars of trust, which I'll go through. The first one is fairness, which revolves around the equitable treatment of people and groups of people. The AI must be explainable and transparent about its recommendations, so it's relevant to stakeholders with multiple objectives. That's number 2, explainable. So that's very important for, say, agencies, marketing agencies that are using AI. They need to know how they are getting the results that are being created by the AI. They need to know where it's come from so that they can use that against their own guidelines, against their own best practices. Robustness, so the AIs need to be actively defendable from attacks and built to withstand new technologies as they arise. Transparency is number 4, so that users, when they actually use AI that might be from IBM, so they can actually see how the service works and comprehend strengths and weaknesses. So they need to know, basically, there's a lot of bias in AI at the minute. So AI algorithms are always built in with the kind of biases that are coded into it, the fact that it's learned from society, which is ultimately biased in one way or another. And they need to be able to understand the strengths and weaknesses of that algorithm. And the last one is privacy. So when AI is collecting data, it must prioritize and safeguard the privacy and rights of that data. And IBM also has 3 principles, which the first one I think is very interesting, is they build it to augment human intelligence and not replace it. So in content marketing, or at least in marketing in general, there is a lot of fear around AI and what it's going to do for jobs, how it's going to change the daily working of life. And again, that is up to the company to be responsible for introducing AI in a kind of moral and ethical way. I know, for instance, I think it was Microsoft, it may have been last year or the year before, they started using AI for their press releases, for their content production, and I think 27 journalists had to be let go from a press agency just because AI was introduced at Microsoft. And that's one way that, obviously, of it going in a way that most people don't want it to, but there we have.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about sort of the accountability that organizations have is really important. So I know with Gemini, obviously, the images, Google did put out a statement saying it's generally a good thing that it's giving a wide range of images, but in this case, it's missing the mark. I think companies really need to take ownership of the content that AI produces. So, like you say, having review systems and policies and having fact checking, human review, just making sure AI content aligns with core values and ethical standards. Because, you know, if you're putting it out there, if you've produced it with AI, then it is your responsibility to make sure that that's not damaging.
No, absolutely. And I think a lot of it as well is a lot of companies, they will have, just in their own business, they have their own ethics and standards. And I think that's a really good place to start on. So if you start with really good, like a moral high ground, you can build around that for AI. And I know there's a lot of marketing agencies at the minute that are using that. So, at the end of the day, I think what we have is AI systems that are only ever as good as the people that are running them. So there's always going to have to be like ongoing training and the evolution of trainings. Like I said, like right at the start, we don't actually know how far AI is going to go yet. I think what was it this week that was released for the videos? Like, is it Solar or something?
Yeah,
you can create
Sora.
Sorry, yeah, you can create incredible, well, you will be able to create incredible videos for that. But with that just one small element of AI, it's a whole new ball game of the responsibilities you're going to have to introduce. You have a lot of, say, video producers out there. You have a lot of movies that might actually use that. I think there was obviously the Hollywood strike was there last year, where the writers went on strikes. The studios started using AI. So again, it's having kind of the groundwork to ensure that you're remaining ethical with the way that you use it and the way that you put it out. And it's important as well, I think, for especially agencies as well, because a lot of brands have their own ethical viewpoints, and they will want to know that they're working with agencies that they can trust, that there is transparency in how this technology is being used. Yeah. And again, that goes on to the next question, actually. How does employing AI in content creation and marketing influence brand trust and credibility? What strategies can brands implement to maintain consumer trust? And what role does consumer demand play in the ethical use of AI and the content they engage with? I'll let you go off with that, Natalia.
Yeah, so I think we know that AI gives us the power to sort of improve engagement and produce content at a massive scale. But it goes back to kind of what we've said, that brands need to have a level of responsibility and maintain the trust with their audience. Nobody is going to get value from, bulk posting generic posts that have nothing to do with your audience, and they're just doing it for engagement purposes. That's not going to work. And then just using AI to not actually benefit your brand, just post it doesn't make sense. So I think the key strategy is transparency, and being open about the use of AI in content creation to help set the right expectations. So quality control, in my opinion, is absolutely non-negotiable. Like, human oversight is a must to make sure the content is accurate. It represents your brand, it's true to your brand values, because otherwise you're losing something. You're losing a sense of what you've set out to be. Today's consumers are more informed than ever, and they're holding brands accountable, and there's a demand for transparency, and they want ethical behavior from brands they support. The consumer pressure is quite powerful for brands, and it should really push them towards ethically using AI. Expectations will be voiced, and brands need to listen and adapt to maintain credibility. So, yeah.
No, exactly. Yeah. And I think it depends on the brand as well, because you have brands in certain spheres where their audiences might not care as much on whether like something uses AI. But I saw something not long back where even like a band had created AI for a music video, and they got a lot of backlash because a lot of people because they were an independent band, but they're just getting kind of big now. But even their own fans were like, well, why have you done this when you could have paid actual creators to go through and make this for you? And it was kind of interesting to see how that particular audience reacted to it. But then you may have, say, maybe companies in the gambling sector where their audience, might not care quite as much about how AI is being used. But yeah, I think brands should always consider the implications of the marketing campaigns that they work on. Like, we always look at like privacy bias, things like discrimination. And as I said before, a company's own values and ethics should extend to AI to provide that ongoing training, so that there is like established expectations and boundaries. And as I said, algorithms learn based on historical data and that can reflect on the biases of an organization. And that's where it kind of gets interesting for agencies, because an agency will work with a plethora of brands. Those particular brands will have their own expectations, will have their own guidelines that you have to adhere to. And I think it's just very, very important that when you're working with AI, that all that is segmented and kept away from each other. You have to be so careful with it. I know companies I know the information you have to put into AI to ensure that you're getting that kind of unbiased data, and it takes hours, and it should take hours. You should put the resources in to ensure that when you're doing content, that it's putting out something that is absolutely viable and credible. And you need to do that every single time, because it doesn't just do it itself. You have to make sure it knows and test it and test it and test it. And it's an exciting kind of like dawn, I think, of doing this. But yeah, there we go. We have one more question. Yeah. So the last question is, how can the impact of bias in AI algorithms on content creation and distribution be addressed? What comprehensive steps are necessary to identify and minimize these biases to ensure fairness and the implications of such biases on market competition and consumer perception? That was a long one.
It is. I think it kind of leads on from what we've just spoke about with the bias. So the bias in AI algorithms can skew content creation and distribution, which it does lead to unfair representation. It perpetuates stereotypes and can even influence customer behaviors in biased ways. I think an example of sort of the bias in AI can be quite subtle sometimes. So you might ask it to generate an image of a CEO or to talk about a CEO, and it'll be he, or it'll be, the image will be like a white man, and it's without any other context. It's just assuming that. So it's kind of that showcases how intertwined these biases can be and how subtly they can come out. I think it's really important that all content creators take that into account when using AI to produce content. So like we said, it is a long process to kind of, eliminate these biases with the data you're putting in, but it is worth it because you want it to be equal with what it's producing. I think some steps that to address the bias could include regular audits of the AI algorithms. That was a mouthful. And analyzing data sets used for training AI, the designs, the outputs, ensuring the data used is diverse and representative of human experience and perspectives. That's evolving as we go on. So the data does need to as well. And then continuous monitoring by humans for biased outcomes and regular updates based on findings. So if, for example, an agency, if you've got a team that's using AI to call out these situations where they're like, oh, that's not right, and then it's our responsibility from there to improve that. It's not just a technical challenge, it's a commitment to sort of ethical responsibility and social fairness in that sense.
No, exactly. Yeah, I think you're right. And I know what you're saying about the CEO thing. I don't know if you're using this same example that I've got in my head, but it was with Google Images, I think, when you typed in the US CEO or picture of a CEO, I think only 15% of the images that came up were women instead of, having kind of an equal set. Yeah, it is really interesting how those kind of flaws work their way in, but it's all about how we improve it and how we move on ahead with how these new technologies are expanding. It's incredible. But I know, for example, like every agency now that I know of, at least, is looking into AI, and I think the future of how agencies use AI is very interesting. It's probably not long before we start seeing like head of AI and like AI teams working alongside it. And I think that's quite exciting. It's not often in marketing when you get this kind of huge opportunity and you get this huge tool to come out and create a whole new kind of a ballpark that you can like kind of play in. Maybe the last one that did that, I think, it was like the advent of social media. So when we started getting Facebook and Twitter and people started putting actual money into advertising there, which must have been, what year are we in now? I was going to say 15 years, but it might have been 16, 17 years ago. And before that, it was search engines and it was SEO. So this is like the next big thing. And we have no one knows where it's going to go. No one knows kind of how quickly it's advancing. I saw something the other week about a group of scientists had got, I think it may have been ChatGPT, they got it to start learning about chemistry. They just left it alone They inputted instructions and they got it learning, and within like 5 days, they realized that it had the same kind of knowledge level as a professor of chemistry and whatever segment of chemistry it was, but they had no idea it had done that. Like, it took them months to actually realize that it had gone and just learned on itself to kind of take in this information and expand it. And there was something again this week where even the experts don't really understand how quickly this is like expanding. So it's a really amazing sphere to be in at the minute, I think.
Yeah, agreed. It's exciting. I think as long as we approach it ethically and the human review is always there. You know, the reason this is going to evolve so quickly is how we guide. Obviously, some of it's out of our control, but we have a responsibility to guide the AI that we use and brands use, and that's, I think, where we can have some element of control.
No, exactly. Yeah, I think that's for sure. But I think we are running up to time at the minute. See if there is anything, any comments. No questions at the minute, so we will leave it at that. But thank you very much, Natalia. I very much enjoyed that little chat we had. Okay, I'll see you later. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us.